Good morning, you all. Really appreciate you taking the time this morning to meet with us. It is 9 a.m. And I think looking at the list of participants, I think we have enough folks to begin. First of all, thank you all for joining us. We do have some some information today that I think will be very, very useful, and some decisions that need to be taken. So as you can probably tell, Caitlin has taken the day off today, so she will not be here. So in her place, Kendall Hayes will be help facilitate this meeting. So let me turn the time over to Kendall for roll call, and we can begin.
Great, thank you, Chair. So we'll go ahead and start with roll call. So Nefi Garza, Brian Yanta.
Hi, present.
Thank you. David Wegman.
Present.
Thank you. Doris Cooksey. Debbie Reed.
Here.
Thank you. Kara Tackett. Jeff Carroll.
Here.
Thank you. John Beasley. Suzanne Scott.
Here.
Thank you. Steve Gonzalez. David Mock.
Here.
Thank you. Stephen Klaus. Okay. Marty Kelly.
Present.
Thank you. Natalie Johnson.
Here.
Jamie McCool.
Present.
Jared Bowen.
Here.
Thank you. Chris Robles.
Here.
Thank you. Richard Baggins. Susan Jablonski. All right, that's it for roll call, and Chair, we do have a quorum.
I'm here, Susan Jablonski.
It looks like John
Oh,
Beasley
thank
has
you.
joined us.
Wonderful.
Let's see.
I also saw Doris on the list. I don't know if she responded, but I think Doris is also.
Okay.
Well, great, thank you. Why don't let's move on to the next item. Next item, just to remind those that are on that are also listening on the call. Generally, in these meetings, we have the opportunity to provide input, and I will tell you, your input is valuable to us. It's important that we receive and we hear some of the concerns or issues that you may have. The next item is for public comment, and let me remind you, limit your comments to 3 minutes if you feel so inclined to do so. If not, at the end of the meeting, there will be another opportunity for public comment. Certainly we'll entertain that. So, Kendall, do we have anybody that has signed up for public comment?
No, sir, we have no public comments at this time.
Okay. Hearing no comments, then we will move on to item 3 on the agenda. Item 3 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the April 20th, which was our last meeting of the San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting for Region 12. Is there any discussion or any edits? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes for April 20th.
I make a motion to approve. Debbie Reed.
Thank you, Debbie.
Dave Wegman, second.
Thank you, Debbie. Having a motion approved and a second. Any discussion? If not, we will proceed to approve the minutes of April 20th, 2021. Having completed item 3, let's move over to item number 4, communication from the Texas Water Development Board. Thank you, Ken.
Oh. Good morning, everyone. Let me just pull that. My apologies. Also, Kendall, did you see my message in the chat that I'm replacing Richard Biggins?
Yes, Anita, I did. Thank you.
No worries. So I just have a couple updates. So the technical guidelines for regional flood planning was finalized and it's posted on our website. We just want to make a note that you all make sure the technical work to complete on regional flood plans follows the guidance that we posted. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email or call me. And then for the technical consultants, we just want to send a reminder out that we have to approve the executed subcontract between the sponsor and the technical consultant, and then also any subcontracts between technical consultants and other firms. And we sent out an email the beginning of April on the 2nd about some of the guidelines that we'll be reviewing on the subcontracts and subcontracts. If you need me to resend that, or if you have any questions, like I said, my email and phone are available. And then that's all I have for updates.
Anita, would you be so kind enough to send that information once again? I don't recall reviewing that that information. If you'd be so kind enough to send it both to myself and our sponsor, certainly appreciate that.
Okay, no problems. Will do.
Well, thank you, Anita, and excited that you're going to be working with us. I imagine Richard's probably going to be pretty busy with other regions, so thank you for the update. You can move on to the next item. As far as a report from myself, this week or this period has been pretty busy with getting everything lined up, making sure we can get our planning consultant that today we will take action on. Our area has received some pretty good rains these couple of weeks. It's been really interesting to see the reaction from not only government, but private sector and all folks coming in, chipping in and helping out wherever it's necessary. We did have some pretty good pockets of rain that we've received. All of that information has been real interesting to me to observe. And so, that's certainly something that once our consultant comes on board, we can have some serious discussions of things coming up. But the only report I have is that we have been able to work through getting a recommendation for a consultant that today we'll hear about. We can have a discussion about that, and my hope is that we can get an endorsement today and approval so we can move along and have our consultant on board. That's all I have to report, so we'll move on to item number 6, which is pre-planning and public input. I'll yield the time.
Anita, the floor is yours for the
Sorry, I was muted. I'm like, can you all hear me? No worries. Hello, everyone. My name's Anita Machiavello. My camera. You guys see me now? Okay. Sorry, a little technical difficulties here. There we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Anita Machiavello. I work with Texas Water Development Board, and I will be presenting on regional flood planning, pre-planning public meeting requirements. Next slide. So each regional flood planning group is required to have at least 2 pre-planning meetings at the beginning of each planning cycle. Of course, we wish that this meeting could be in person with you, like the past meeting in Bastrop that we have pictured here. We, the Texas Water Development Board, are presenting this to provide you, the public, with more information about the regional flood planning process to inform the public input you will give to the regional flood planning group members. Next slide. Just to provide a little background about regional flood planning, Senate Bill 8 passed in 2019 and requires a bottom-up watershed-based regional flood planning with public input. Texas Water Development Board designated flood planning regions as shown in the map in April and designated the initial voting members of the groups in October. Regional flood planning group members are all volunteers who represent various interest categories. Each regional flood planning group will have their own website, and you may contact them through this website to learn more about how to participate and how to stay informed. There will be many opportunities for public input in this process. There will be at least 2 of these pre-planning meetings, plus opportunity for public input at each regional flood planning group meeting, as well as on the draft regional flood plans. Next slide. Here is an overall timeline for the first regional flood planning group planning cycle. Your regional flood planning groups are currently working on contracts with the Texas Water Development Board and beginning to solicit technical consultants. Then they can begin the technical work on producing their regional flood plans, which are due January 2023. These pre-planning meetings are to solicit your feedback and suggestions at the beginning of this planning cycle. All regional flood plans will be rolled into a statewide flood plan, which is due September 2024. Next slide. So what will your regional flood planning groups have to do for the first regional flood plan? First, they'll need to gather information and see where there's needed more data about flood risk. Next, they'll need to evaluate floodplain management practices, identify, evaluate, and recommend flood evaluation strategies and projects. And finally, the regional flood planning groups will make recommendations about which of these evaluation projects and strategies should be included in the regional flood plan. I would just like to note that this is not an exhaustive list of tasks to be accomplished, but just an overview. Next slide. Once the regional flood planning groups identify flood risks in the region, they will gather ideas for flood mitigation that are appropriate for each region. These could be structural or non-structural. The left picture is an example of a non-structural solution using mangroves on the Texas coast to stabilize shorelines. And on the right is the Galveston seawall, pictured as an example of a structural solution. Next slide. That brings us back to the purpose of this meeting, which is to get your input on the development of the group's regional flood plan. This is not the only opportunity for public involvement in the regional flood planning process. Public input is received at each regional flood planning group meeting, and the public will get to comment on the draft regional flood plan once it is developed. Next slide. I want to thank you all for listening to my presentation, and will now hand it back over to the chair to provide any input to the RFPG members. Thank you.
Anita, thank you so much for that presentation and sharing that information with us. Certainly very valuable to us, and excited to go down this path of developing the plans, both structural and non-structural. So it'll be a good process. Thank you. So in order for us to accomplish that, we need to go into item number 7, which is the action and discussion regarding the recommendation of a technical consultant firm for the San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group. As you recall, and some of you may know, we struggled a little bit with the way we do it. So generally, when an agency or a municipality or is selecting a consultant, there is a certain process that we followed. In this particular case, we had some challenges in the way we did this. So ultimately, what we ended up doing is we had a few members of the executive team and a member of the general group, as well as some staff members from our sponsor, do the initial evaluation and interviews and provide a recommendation to the executive team. The executive team then met and heard the recommendation, and now we did feel comfortable coming to the overall group. So to talk a little bit about the process and ultimately the selection, I'd like to turn the time over to Debbie Reed. Debbie was selected she's a part of the executive team, but she was also a part of the group that did the selection and did the tough and hard work of reviewing all the requests for qualifications of the various firms. And Debbie, I'm going to turn the time over to you to tell us a little bit of the process that was followed, and then if you can tell us what the recommended consultant firm is, please.
Yes, thank you, Neffy. There was a group of us that reviewed the 5 submittals for the proposals and qualifications. We had about a week to do so, and then we re-met with our ratings. And there was quite a lot of lively discussion. And as Neffy had mentioned before the process started, that there will be some that stand out. And we had three really good proposals that stood out. Each one was stronger in one aspect than the other aspect. But after reviewing those, we felt that maybe we could assist in having some interviews to give us a little bit more details on the proposals and their strategy for completing the task in a timely fashion. And so those interviews occurred last week, and we were able, again, the selection team rated those presentations and then selected HDR half firm. And part of that was they just had such a strong engineering aspect in their proposal. But all of those 3 final ones, the rating was very, very close. It was a difficult decision. Any questions?
Debbie, did the interviews help? Did it help conducting the interviews and get a sense of the team?
Yes, that's a good question. Some of the concerns that the selection committee had was, we know that there are a lot of projects going on statewide, and of course each region is also competing for the technical consultant. So making sure that we had a team that would be consistent with our process and available, that they would be able to give us the time needed. And so that was actually one of the questions that the selection group had asked to elaborate more on. And that really assisted us, because we heard that we're not the first one to make this selection, so that there were already groups out there, technical consultants that have been selected. And then the other one was a little bit more on their process and how they might incorporate nature-based solutions for flood issues, and then the public outreach, how to keep the lower basin in our area engaged and to make sure that they were prioritized and having to be able to participate and feel that their word has value in the process. So those were the 3 big questions that we asked for the interviews, and the team did a much better job, or each group did a much better job of expounding on that.
Neffy, this is Suzanne. I just wanted to add something, if I may.
Yes, of course.
In the conversation, when Debbie presented this to the executive committee, one of the things, and I know this was one of the things that Neffy brought up as it related to the selection process, is to ensure the consultant's familiarity with the basin. And this particular group, HDR half, both have, and particularly the project managers that will be working on this, on our region, have extensive knowledge of this basin, the San Antonio River Basin, have done work in the basin itself, are familiar with the flooding challenges, the hydrology and hydraulics and modeling that's been going on. So, and as Debbie had mentioned to us as well, is that the prime project manager and the support project manager both are dedicating themselves exclusively to our basin, versus their firms may be working in other basins, but they are dedicating themselves to this basin full time as it related to the work. So I thought those two particular attributes to this team that Debbie shared with us did make the team very attractive to the executive team. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Suzanne. I certainly appreciate that, making that comment. Any other comments from either the executive group that heard the presentation or that were a part of the selection?
Neffy, this is Jeff Carroll. Suzanne kind of said exactly what I was going to say, that the half HDR team, or HDR half team, basically the way they talked and the way they were able to concentrate on this basin with those project managers is something that really appealed to several of us on the committee, on the scoring committee.
Any other comments about the selection of the HDR half team before we, so the way that this is going to work is that the executive team is recommending the selection of the half HDR, but it'll be this body that will make the decision, and ultimately we will have an action and a vote to accept and to accept this firm. So any other comments?
Neffy, I would like to add one small comment, please.
Certainly, yeah.
Having worked, well, I guess with federal government actions, having not really worked with HAP, but specifically HDR, they bring a wealth of knowledge in the hydrology and the hydrological processes and do a fantastic job. I've worked with the state, the Texas Department of Transportation, and the U.S. Army for over 20 years, and HDR has not ever disappointed anyone from statement of work through all milestones in completing a really solid, plan from the hydrological perspective. So just thought I would put that out there.
Thank you, John. I certainly appreciate that. I tell you, I think the majority of the executive team, if not all the executive team, has had experience with both firms and or one of the others. And most of us know the project managers well, so we're happy to recommend that. But I also want to take a moment to thank the other firms that made this decision difficult, because there's certainly some very good talent. There are very good firms out there that have done great work. So I just want to thank you for your interest, and by all means, please keep an eye on the work that's going to happen here, because I think there'll certainly be benefits to us all. So having said that, let's take the action of accepting the recommendation from the executive team. Can I have a motion to accept the HDR half team as our technical consultant for Region 12?
Dave Wegman, so moved.
I'll second.
Can I get a second?
John Beasley seconds.
John Beasley, thank you. Thank you, John.
Cool.
Let's do a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, please say aye. Okay, hearing none. Motion passes. And HDR Half Associates, congratulations. And we will, in all due diligence, we will go on and through the sponsor get you guys on contract. Congratulations.
Neffy, I think Ron was on the call. I was seeing. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Suzanne, I'm here.
Oh, why don't you introduce yourself real quick to the group?
Thank you, Suzanne. I didn't even notice Ron was on the call. So certainly, Ron, please take a
I
moment.
just saw his name, so I thought he.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was here listening, but I want to thank the selection committee and the executive committee for their time to listen to our interviews. As Suzanne said, my name is Ron Branyan. I'm with HDR. I run I'm the water resources lead in San Antonio. I have experience throughout the basin, over 20 years developing flood mitigation and flood mapping throughout the entire basin from top to bottom. And I've pretty much committed my life to this basin, so I'm really excited about this opportunity. And yes, as they mentioned, myself and Troy Dorman, who's the assistant project manager from HAF, we're both committed to this basin. We're not working on any of the other flood plans for any of the other regions. And so we look forward to getting this process underway and working with everybody in this group. And so I've known many of you and look forward to meeting the rest of you. So thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ron, and welcome aboard. Well, having completed agenda item 7, let's move on to agenda item number 8. One of the things that was recommended or asked.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in?
Oh, yes, by all
Do you
means.
mind if I jump in? Yeah, just about item 6, to accept, the purpose of the pre-planning meeting is to accept public input. So for it to count as a pre-planning meeting, you would need to open the floor for public comment. So I just want to defer to you whether you want to do that now or later, to just open the floor for public comment on item 6. And
Anita, is it possible for us to count the public input or public comment period at the end of our meeting? Would that count, or or would you like to see the floor open at this point? Because that item number 11 in our agenda does call for a public comment period.
for it to count with the pre-planning meeting, it needs to be open with the item.
Okay. Then let's go back to item number 6, and let's make sure we fulfill the requirements for the pre-planning public meeting and open it up for any kind of public comment at this point. Kendall, did you receive any requests for comments from the public?
No, sir, no requests.
And again, let me remind you again in agenda item number 11, which will be towards the end of our meeting, there will be also an opportunity for public comment from anybody that would like to. So Anita, hearing none, no comment, can we move on to the next item?
Yes, you just have to open the floor up with the item for it to count as a pre-planning meeting.
Understood.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. No problem.
No problem.
Thank you, Anita. So let's move on to item number 8 on our agenda. As you recall, we were specifically asked to put together a short presentation to talk about some of the flood prevention investments done within the city of San Antonio and Bexar County, which is the largest populated centers. And why don't we take a moment? What I could do is, Dave, if it's okay with you, I can share I've prepared a couple of slides as I represent I work for the city of San Antonio. I have prepared a couple of slides for this presentation, and then I can turn the time, after my presentation, I'll turn the time over to Dave, who I believe has a couple of items. So let me see if I can share my slides. Kendall, you may have to make me a presenter. I don't know if you can do that. Okay, I got it. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes,
Yeah,
that looks good.
All right. So first of all, thank you for this. I probably have more slides than we have time, but I'm going to try and go through these as soon as possible. This is actually a presentation that I share for many of the citizens of San Antonio when we're asked to present. And I always like to begin with this slide. Let me see if I can get this guy going. I always like to begin with this slide. I think it's important that we always keep in mind the location on where we live. Some of you have seen this slide. San Antonio and our basin falls within an area known as Flash Flood Alley, where world records have been set with amount of rainfall. And that Flash Flood Alley is a term given to this region by the National Weather Service. And it has to do with our topography, with the hill country to the northwest, and then just the flatlands to the southeast, and everything drains in that direction. Again, some of the world records of flooding have occurred within this region, within that Flash Flood Alley, and these are some of the rainfall totals. Thrall in 1921 is an important one. That one actually was the reason why some of our infrastructure, namely Olmos Dam, was constructed in 1921. Thrall, which is a little town not too far from Austin, received 36 inches in 18 hours. Incredible amount of rainfall amounts. The one that I find interesting in New Braunfels, which is just so close to us, 10 inches in 1 hour. Incredible amount of rainfall totals. Other areas in the world that rival this is areas in northern India that receive this type of a rainfall total. So it is with that we remember, we are not strangers to big floods. Of course, this is Highway 281 looking south towards downtown. To the left of the screen is the quarry market. That flood pool that you see there actually is created by Olmos Dam, and we can talk about a little bit. This next slide is a screenshot of I-10, Highway I-10 over by Fiesta, Texas, and the rim development. Here's the main lanes of I-10 underwater. So San Antonio is no stranger to big major flood events. So it's I always like to begin my presentation with that in mind, because it's with this background that we go to what it is. So within the city of San Antonio, the direction has been to handle flood management with in the Department of Public Works. And I know some of you that live in the city or are familiar with it. Our department has had various names. A portion of our department was known as Sims for a while, and then it was TCI, and now now we're back to Public Works. So yes, we are Public Works. Within Public Works, our director is Razi Husseini, and there are five different divisions within our department, and they include traffic, streets, project delivery, and support services. Those are the various divisions. Overall, Public Works is 800 plus employees strong. I'm fortunate enough to work as the assistant director for stormwater, and we're just under 300 strong. Includes everything from maintenance workers to equipment operators, engineers, GIS technicians, and environmental specialists. Within stormwater, there are three smaller divisions: one operations, environmental, and engineering. And so I'll quickly go through some of those items to give you a sense of what we're doing. But before that, I think it's important that we understand that we have a large inventory. Within the city of San Antonio, there are 926 miles of channels that we maintain annually, as well as 369 miles of natural creeks. And we also have 56 square miles of FEMA floodplain and 574 miles of underground infrastructure. And I always add this piece of it, and we have 4,000 miles of streets. You'll say, well, what does that have to do with it? Well, in San Antonio, our streets do convey water, so they generally are a part of our network, and I'll get into that in a little bit. We do have two major funding sources. Stormwater is not a part of the general fund for the city of San Antonio. we've actually been declared a utility. So within San Antonio, stormwater is a utility, not unlike SAWS or CPS is. And the two funding sources are, the big one is the stormwater utility fee. And that is a fee that is assessed to every property owner within our city. That assessment is based on existing impervious cover. So if you have more impervious cover, you pay more. If you have less impervious cover, you're going to pay less. It is based on impervious cover. And we use that money strictly for maintenance and repairs and those kinds of things. And that's really the large piece of our funding source. The second funding source is something called the Regional Stormwater Fee, or Regional Stormwater Fund. And that is a fee that is assessed to new development. Some of you may have heard of this, also referred to as the fee in lieu of detention. This one always people get a little confused on it, but let me explain to you quickly what that means. The fee in lieu of detention, or FILO as we refer to it, is a fee that is assessed to new development only after they have proven, engineering-wise, that their proposed development will not have an adverse impact on their neighbors. If a development shows that there's going to be impact downstream because they're increasing the amount of runoff, then they have to do on-site mitigation, or they can do some downstream improvements. But only in the situation where it shows that there's no adverse impact, that they're not flooding anybody, then and only then do we allow them to pay the fee in lieu of detention. In many communities, when you can prove there's no downstream impact, everything stops. It ends. They get their permit, they move along. In our city, that's not the case, because if you don't have any adverse impact, you're not flooding anybody today, that doesn't mean you're not having an impact. You certainly are having an impact, and we receive those funds and we use the money, in this case, for regional drainage projects. And it's not limited to that area. We have the freedom to use it in various other areas. So these are the two major funding sources within the city. Now, I added this. This is an estimate. This is numbers a couple of years ago. And it fluctuates obviously as development changes and so forth, but this is our yearly budget. We roughly receive roughly about $55 million in stormwater funds for that. As you can see from the inner circle there, 97% of that comes from the stormwater utility fee, the fee that assesses impervious cover. And that is a monthly fee that we collect through a SALS bill. And only 3% of that comes from new development through the FILO. So that's what makes up my yearly budget. Now, from that, 48% of that goes towards operations, 33 for personnel, and then 19 of it is really 19% of the 55 million in general we use for projects that includes new capital projects or repairs. The maintenance programs themselves, obviously vegetation control that include mowing, herbicide, street sweeping, as well as flood control that includes the maintenance of our natural creekways, channel restoration, and tunnels. We do have interactive websites where you can see when we will be mowing and when we will be sweeping. You'll ask, why is the city involved in street sweeping? It's associated with our MS4 permit, our municipal separate storm sewer system permit with the EPA that requires us to clean as much before water enters into our rivers and streams. In our flood control section, we manage our infrastructure, we maintain it. Olmos Dam is probably one of the biggest infrastructure. If you haven't been out to Olmos Dam here recently, we're actually power washing it, cleaning it up right now and sealing it. This is an old picture. If you get out there, you'll see it. It really stands out. It's really bright because we're power washing it, cleaning it up, so you can see that. And obviously the tunnels, the flood control tunnels. We're lucky enough in San Antonio to have 2 of them, thanks to the River Authority who managed the project. And now we maintain this infrastructure. It's an inverted siphon. Works off of gravity, drops 150 feet underground, 24 feet in diameter, 3 miles underneath downtown. Now, what's interesting is during a flood event, obviously water flows from the left of the screen to the right of the screen, diverting water underneath downtown so that downtown will not flood. But during drought condition, and many people don't know this, but during drought condition, we have the ability to recirculate. So it turns out that we capture, the tunnels are always full of water, so we actually capture the water at the downstream end, and then at the upstream end, we pump water out of it and pour it into the Riverwalk. So when you're downtown at the Riverwalk, all that water you see there is water that we've captured in a flood event. We have the ability to recirculate, and generally we're always recirculating because it's not always raining. It's during the rain event that we flip the switch and water goes from left to right. But during drought conditions, we have a 24-foot diameter, 3-mile-long pipe full of water that we use to recirculate in our Riverwalk. So talk about a big reuse project. That's what the flood tunnels do for us. So, and we're lucky enough in this city to have 2 of them. Here are a couple of pictures of the tunnel when it was built. Here's the bit that constructed the tunnel. Again, the River Authority managed it. Managed the construction of it, and what an amazing project. And here's a couple of other historic photos. Incredible project, and I will tell you, unique in the world. There's a lot of tunnels, but this one is completely dedicated to flood control and recirculation, which is pretty unique. But as a part of flood control, we also, our crews also do repairs of channels. We take care of debris removal after flood events. We take care of our low water crossings. We have been tasked with taking care of any tree downs. And then, and here recently, we've started engaging in homeless encampment cleanups, which is a whole different discussion that we can have another day. Our engineering team, we investigate, plan, and when funding is available, we go into design, an important component of that. And then also our environmental section, that it's basically the environmental compliance for our city, and any project within the city has to go through them, and they fall within our purview in our work. Other programs that we have include municipal setting designation, or MSD, which is groundwater contamination. We help with mitigation of that. We have a ban on coal tar. My predecessor, Art Reinhardt, was one instrumental in getting that ban put in place. Certainly appreciate all his hard work in doing that. And a little program known as Adopt a Spot that has here recently during the pandemic has generated so much support from groups. It's actually during the pandemic, it's grown 300%. It started off with just a small group of folks doing Adopt a Spot, but during the pandemic and shutdown, it's grown, like I said, 300%. And now it's been incredible to see the public really participating and embracing the cleaning up of our channels and rivers. Additionally, we are doing televising of our infrastructure. I mentioned almost 600 miles of underground televising. The picture there at the upper right is some of the oldest within downtown, where we're televising, doing an assessment of it, and developing plans to repair, to try and avoid sinkholes. It's been an incredible process, and one that we could probably spend hours talking about, but the televising and condition assessment has been a real unique thing for us. As far as the investment is concerned that we've done, here's a chart of the millions of dollars that the city has spent in bond programs. You know, the bonds themselves, the city will go out and get basically a loan, and a loan to build infrastructure, and in time we pay that off. In the early years, obviously, you see there the graph. The entire bond was 110 million, 104, 115, but then something happened. And then in 2007, all of a sudden, our credit rating started getting up. We started doing things, and now we're in 2017, 800 million in bond. And this coming fiscal year will probably be similar to that. I know we were talking about maybe doing a little bit less, but we will probably be in the same range. So breaking that up a little bit more to answer the question of our investment, in 2017, Proposition 2, which is generally our drainage, we saw 152 million in capital projects. And these projects are not maintenance projects. These are new drainage projects. In 2012, 120 million. In 2017, 139, for a total of almost 500 million in the past 10 years in bond work. I've also added the street proposition, and the reason why is because, again, in San Antonio, streets help with draining our water. And when the street proposition goes through, they also build some drainage infrastructure associated with the streets. And that one, obviously, it's at 1.1 billion. So together, the city has invested in new infrastructure, more than $1.5 billion in the last 10 years for infrastructure that has a direct impact on our drainage system and network. Specifically in the 2017, I mentioned 139 million in drainage. There you see in Proposition 2, the breakdown between streets, drainage, parks, library, public safety, and the new one, neighborhood housing. I'm proud to say, I'm excited to have 19 projects in the last bond that reduced the risk of 263 properties out of flood risk. So how exciting to see that. But I will tell you, it's not just building new projects and helping reduce the risk of existing infrastructure. It also has to do with new development and new standards. I'm very proud to be able to say that San Antonio, together with our private sector, has worked very hard to have higher standards for development. Here's a screenshot. The screenshot to the left is a cross-section that shows the special flood hazard area, the FEMA floodplain as you know it. Many communities throughout the country are allowed to build in what's known as the flood fringe, just outside the floodway. Well, in San Antonio, we don't allow that. We don't allow building in the flood fringe. As a matter of fact, we regulate to what we call the 100-year ultimate, which is that area in green that you see there. And I think that those higher standards have really helped reduce the level of flooding, especially in new developed areas. So development standards are also critical. And that kind of leads to this next slide, where the next question is, what about resiliency? What are we doing about that? And while we still have clinics and gas station, grocery store, daycare centers that are that still are in the floodplain, we have many that are not. So we still have work to do. We still have work to do within our city. But how do we protect our critical infrastructure that is critical to our community? And it's really through continual investment, through maintenance, through innovative solutions like those that the county has helped us with, that the River Authority is leading us through things like Old Spanish Trail, which actually was the biggest buyout, I think, in the state of a mall that ultimately is now some soccer field. It's actually a big detention pond, and now there's soccer fields there, Ceiling Channel, and other projects like that. And in the meantime, we continue to monitor the floods through a website known as bearflood.org that the River Authority hosts for us. And it's that BRWM partnership that has really made a difference in helping us. So those are some of the investments. Again, $1.5 billion in the last 10 years for the city of San Antonio. That's what I have. Any questions for me before I turn the time over to Mr. Dave Wegman to talk about the county's investment? Hearing none, I will stop sharing and turn the time over to Dave Wegman.
Thank you, Neffy. That was a great presentation. As always, the City of San Antonio, in partnership with Bexar County and the San Antonio River Authority, as well as all of our suburban cities, work well together as we strive to keep our community safe. Kendall, if I could have the ability to share. Give me just a moment. All right, does that share okay for you guys?
Yes.
I'm on the wrong slide though, so hang on just a moment. Okay, my program is going to be not nearly as robust as the presentation that Neffy made. So I just wanted to share a few slides that kind of augment what Neffy said. Once again, we've had a long partnership through the DRWM with the city of San Antonio, our suburban cities, and the River Authority in an effort to protect our community from the serious flooding issues that plague our county and city. Just a little bit of brief history. Commissioner's Court helped Bexar County establish a $500 million 10-year flood control program subsequent to the devastating floods of 1998 and 2002. We utilized extensively the San Antonio River Authority, our technical groups associated with identifying damage centers and where we could have the most regional impact throughout Bexar County. To that end, we had 80+ projects that were on the books to move forward for regional flood control. These projects are funded by a countywide flood control tax. Unlike with a lot of the effort that Neffy does, this flood control program was not bond funded whatsoever. It was certificates of obligation. And so our budget office would just allocate funds to us for these projects over that 10-year period as was required. So knowing that water knows no boundaries, it was 100% a collaborative effort. Over half of the projects that were undertaken by this Bexar County 10-year, $500 million flood control program was actually in the city of San Antonio. Happy to do so. Residents who are throughout Bexar County don't care whether they're in unincorporated Bexar County or within the city of San Antonio. Flooding is flooding. To that end, we had over 80 projects, won a number of awards. Our staff augmentation partner at the time was AECOM with them and their sub-consultants. And we had them prepare kind of an economic analysis of the impact that it had over Bexar County. And it was determined that over $800 million and 4,700 jobs contributed to the local economy in addition to the flood control efforts themselves. Just some project highlights, some of the projects that we undertook. Shepherd Road at Elm Creek, Ingram Road Bridge, that was always a site. Every time we had a small rainstorm event, that Ingram Road Bridge site was always a location of high water rescues. 1,700-foot bridge. Up on the northeast side, Evans Road Bridge on the east side of San Antonio, the Roland Avenue Bridge, along with trail systems. Once again, some of the takeaways from the flood control program, $500 million over 10 years. We improved approximately 63 low water crossings, 8 dam improvement projects, including that Almost Dam that Neppy had mentioned in his project. We also have our high water detection systems. We call it HALT, which is High Water Alert Life-Saving Technology. That 142 number is a moving number depending on how many sites that we end up protecting. Simply speaking, we have more low water crossings in Bexar County than we have the ability to put a 100-year structure in. So to protect the public, we put these flashing beacons and automated arms to close the road during flood events to protect the traveling public. We have those sites both in Bexar County, but also in the city of San Antonio, a number of our suburban cities, and within TxDOT right-of-way. In aggregate, that 10-year program removed over 1,500 homes from the 100-year regulatory floodplain. This next slide is just a touch on how that high water detection system works. We have pressure transducers in the flow line of the low water crossings that determine the amount of water at any given time over the road. As that water starts rising, we have a website that the public can log into to allow them to see whether the road is underwater and dangerous or not. As always, if there's water over the road, please turn around and don't drown. Don't take the chance. This just recaps what I got finished talking about. It was everything we've done is a partnership with the city of San Antonio, San Antonio River Authority, and our suburban cities. We continue to work with the city and our suburban cities and look forward to a long and continued relationship. And that was pretty much all I had, guys.
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate the presentation. So as you can see, there has been significant investment in our community. And I think a lot of it really is due to the partnership, the Bexar Regional Watershed Partnership coming together and together with the expertise from the River Authority and the participation of the suburban cities has really led to a coalition, a group that is really making a difference in trying to keep our community safe. We still have more to do. We still have more work to do. I think we've taken care of a lot of the what I call the low-hanging fruit, a lot of the projects that we can do, but there's still a lot of some heavy, serious projects that still need to get done, and that's what we're looking for. More innovative ideas of doing it. So is there any questions or any discussion that the group would like to do before we move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah, Neffy, this is Debbie Reed, and I was just wondering, those were really great presentations from both of you, and I appreciate the effort. And do you know, or could maybe our rep talk about, are there some of this information that might be available for communities in the lower regions?
Debbie, that's a really good question. Let me reach out to, I know Scott has would have some information, or somebody from the River Authority. I think I see Steve. So let me, I think I see Steve
I
Graham.
can
So
also,
Suzanne,
I
anything
can
you'd
say
like-
something Steve can add, but yes, the San Antonio River Authority has prepared a watershed master plan for our downstream communities, and we work with them directly as to kind of assessing where damage centers have been located based on, the mapping and modeling that's been done with the floodplain. And, we identify those projects and then work with those communities to determine, investments that they can make. Now, obviously, the resources in our downstream communities are not as great as are available within the city and the county. Some of our communities have taken advantage of some of the state funds for flood control projects. They've done some bridge enhancements. They've done, some other things like that. The River Authority staff has worked directly with those communities. I know Aaron Cavazos goes down there several times to help those communities, not only with their local projects, but also other projects that they work with TxDOT and others on. Steve can add a little bit more to that, but I do know that through this particular effort, this flood infrastructure fund that has been created recently by the state, I believe Karnes County put in a recommendation for a project, and I'm not certain if it was happening right when I was transitioning from that job to this one, so I'm not certain whether or not their funding came through on that project, but I believe that they were selected. I'm not sure. But again, I think the point is that these programs that are available now will allow for these smaller communities to access funds that they otherwise maybe would not have had the opportunity. So I'll let Steve Graham add to that.
So everything Suzanne said was correct. Karnes County was approved for FIF funding for a planning grant for Karnes County. Sarah and the city of Kennedy and some others were all contributors to Karnes County, but they do have the grant from the state, and they will move out with that effort. We will make sure that their results dovetail with what we have. As Suzanne said, we actually have master plans for the entire basin. They tend to be very heavy in Bexar County, of course, but we do have project ideas downstream, and we are updating that as we speak. In particular with future conditions, climate change scenarios. So we'll look, we know the damage today, and we'll also have some idea about risk and resiliency for the future.
Thank you.
And this is Melissa. I also wanted to note that we even work with Bandera County, and we've worked with David Mock before. So we really look at this from a regional perspective as well.
Thanks.
Hey,
Thanks. Good information.
Nephew, this is Robert Boyd with Comal County.
Yes, sir.
And so those were great presentations you provided for City of San Antonio and Bexar County. And I think one of the questions I have in regards to this regional plan that we're discussing right now, that we're putting together or is being put together, and HDR is going to help with that project. Is there a sense of, I see what Bexar County and City of San Antonio has put towards their improvements for these flood improvement projects. Would this plan that's going to be presented to the state legislature in 2024, is it going to have tasks for cities and counties to say, we've identified, projects that could happen in your area that would benefit the regional plan here, and there's a sense or requirement for that city or county to put funding towards those projects that are part of the regional plan? Does that make sense as far as, is there a requirement for local governments to contribute to the regional plan that is developed through this legislative process?
You know, you bring up a really good question. I'll let somebody else answer in details, but I think some of that work is certainly on the table. There's going to be certainly opportunities to do that, but I think what's important here is I think that while the city and the county, we've been focused within our area, I think it's important, and you know, the way I'm seeing this is an overall watershed approach to finding out, okay, what are the areas of need, what are the challenges, and what's available to fix. And then at that point, then we can start looking at, okay, what kind of funding is available? Certainly there's going to be some local funding that may or may not be available, but also there may be other opportunities, maybe some public-private partnerships that may be available, but also looking towards federal grants, state grants. What kind of opportunities is there? We can't approach talking about that until we know what the need is, until we have a plan. You know, one of the challenges that I was faced at the city of San Antonio, my former city manager said, if I could write you a check to fix all the drainage problems in San Antonio, how much would that be? And we didn't have an idea. And that's why I think this plan is so important, so we can get at least try and get a breath of what the needs are, so then we can start allocating the needed funds, and then we can start looking at some of those details of what you're asking. So any response from the Texas Water Development, Anita, anything that you'd like to add to that question or comment?
No, I don't at this time, but thank you, Neffy, for giving me the floor.
Neffy, this is Suzanne. I just wanted to make sure if the question was, does the plan, if a project is identified in the plan, is the local entity required through this planning effort to implement that project? And as I understand it, it is not a requirement that the entity put that project in or fund that project. It just identifies that, a particular project for a flooding issue that's been identified. So if he was trying to get to, does this planning mandate actions by a city or county? I believe, and unless the Water Development Board corrects me here, there is no mandate. It allows, if the project is in the plan, it would allow that community to access funding through the state for the project if it's a project that community wants to put in, but it's not a mandate.
Good point. Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, I'll jump in with Suzanne and say that local entities aren't required or mandated to include those local plans. She's correct.
And I appreciate that distinction, because I think what we're talking about is almost like a plan that identifies something, so when we do apply for state or federal funding, we can say, hey, this has been identified in a regional plan, and it would, I imagine, raise the prospects of getting grant funding because it's been identified in a regional plan that's been established by the state. Great, thank you.
Thank you for that comment and question. I think it would be appropriate, having heard a presentation from the city of San Antonio and Bexar County, I think if possible, I'd like to request a presentation by the San Antonio River Authority, our sponsor, on some of the efforts downstream. I know Steve Graham and staff have mentioned something, but I think it would be appropriate to maybe see a couple of slides. Steve, if you're still on the call, or anybody else from the River Authority, Brian, if you guys could make a note in one of the upcoming meetings, if you could help us provide just a couple of slides on some of the things, some of the investments that have been going on in certainly in the downstream counties, but any other county that you guys are providing assistance, so we can get a little better picture of some of the work that's being done elsewhere.
Yeah, we're happy to do that, Neffy.
Thank you, Steve. Certainly appreciate that. All right. Great, great agenda item. So, Brian, did you have a comment?
Just real quick, regarding the question about the requirement or no requirement. After this first flood plan is completed, projects that are identified just like you and Suzanne were saying, they become eligible for state funding after this first plan is completed. So there is certainly advantages to identifying potential projects through this process. Right now, we're in an interim period before the first plan is created that the Flood Infrastructure Fund is open for anything that qualifies. But post-plan, once we have this first one created, it'll be projects that are identified within the plan that are going to be more highly qualified. So there's certainly advantages to participating through this process.
Thank you, Brian. Any other comments associated with item 8 or the questions that have been presented?
And Brian, this is Robert again. I imagine that's going to also, the first plan is also going to have a prioritization, probably based on, the greatest benefit cost, ratio and net impact. I imagine there'll be almost like a ranking of these projects within the region.
You ask a very good question, and I don't have that answer specifically. I know in the regional water planning process now that ranking of projects is required. I'm not certain if that's a requirement in the flood plan, on the flood planning side, but we can certainly answer that in the future, or if Anita knows off the top of her head.
I will say that a lot of the funding that's generally available, a benefit to cost ratio is an important component to that. But I will tell you, and I just can't stay quiet. I need to share this. At the city of San Antonio, we're really taking a look at how we do the benefit to cost ratio, because generally benefit to cost ratio, it's very, it follows numbers very well, costs and so forth, market cost. And we've had to take a really serious look about that, because in San Antonio, we're really considering equity. We're looking at disadvantaged areas. And when you apply a benefit to cost ratio in homes that have been built pre-1970, your community takes a toll. I remember walking floodplain area with one of the councilmen in this area and explaining to them that based on the benefit cost ratio, it's easier to just buy all these homes than to build the channel or build the improvement. And that council person looked at me and he said, if you did that, you would destroy the fabric of this neighborhood. So, we have to be careful, I think, on how we use the benefit to cost ratio. I know it's important, it's needed to help us make decisions, but in light of equity and in light of looking at, we really have to look at it carefully. So, hopefully we can really look at it with a careful lens.
Can I just jump in and just say a note really quick over that last comment? So flood projects will have to be in the plan to access future TWDB funding for those projects. But projects will be ranked in the state plan, not in the regional flood plans. So they won't be ranked in the regional flood plans at all. Prioritization will occur in the future through specific TWD funding programs, similar to the current flood infrastructure funding that you guys were mentioning earlier.
So we will not be ranking projects or prioritizing projects within the regional flood plan. That's going to be done by the Water Development Board at the state level in the future.
That's correct, Brian.
Thank you for that clarification.
Very good. Thank you.
Let's move on. Let's move on to agenda number 9. I know we have another presentation here from by the Texas General Land Office regarding river basin flood studies. So I'll yield the floor to whoever's giving the presentation. I'm not sure who it's.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Robles. I am the outreach specialist and the non-voting member for the Texas General Land Office. It's my pleasure to introduce this today and talk about this one-time planning effort and how it can support the flood resiliency goals of the San Antonio RFPG. The GLO's mission is to collect, analyze, and communicate disaster-related data to help communities protect themselves from future disasters. In line with that mission, the Combined River Basin Study was initiated in 2020 to support long-term recovery in areas affected by Hurricane Harvey. The study was divided into 3 separate regions for execution, and our focus for today's presentation is the West region. Now I will turn the presentation over to Elizabeth Levitt, who is the West Region Study Vendor Project Manager with AECOM. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chris. All right. Firstly, I wanted to start off by saying that I did get an opportunity at this group's meeting last month during the public comment period to briefly introduce the GLO project. I appreciate having the floor for that moment to kind of plug our information sessions that we've since had with a lot of the stakeholders. It's an honor to have more of an opportunity to talk to you about the project today. I'm also here supported by my outreach lead, Stephen Tolbert with Partner Forces, as well as Shonda Mace, who is the GLO PM for the West region. This morning, and if you would advance the slide, Kendall. This morning, we're going to be talking about the overall study. I'll be introducing the study team, which includes the GLO CDR planning team, as well as delivery partners and leads from the AECOM team. I'll also be discussing the timeline for this study and our associated approach, as well as a discussion on coordination with this and other regional flood planning groups. I'll touch on identification of potential grant funding available for flood resiliency, and then finally discuss next steps in the study. And then we'll leave it open for questions if anyone has any follow-up questions to that. Next slide. The West region study area is shown on the map to your right. It includes 25 counties and 5 river basins: the Colorado, Lavaca, Guadalupe, San Antonio, and Nueces. The San Antonio flood planning group is shown in blue. The primary goal of the Combined River Basin's flood study is to collect accurate and reliable data to build our collective resilience against disasters. Good data helps communities in several ways, including evaluating actual risk, supporting cost-effective mitigation strategies, and determining funding sources for future projects. Benefits include gathering data and assessing flood risk, building from data and studies and mitigation projects you may have already identified as a community. The studies will support planning and feasibility for local and regional risk reduction projects. And finally, all of this is to increase community disaster resilience. The GLO study is running concurrently with the San Antonio region's Cycle 1 planning efforts and can therefore be used to support in sharing outreach and data collection resources. Ongoing coordination with the San Antonio region will remain focused on identifying key opportunities for the West Region team to share available, collected, and compiled information that can be leveraged in the development of the regional flood plan. Next slide, please. So the GLO Community Development and Revitalization Planning Team includes Jet Hayes, the Deputy Director of Integration, Colleen Jones, the Director of Planning, Shonda Mace, who's the GLO Project Manager for West and Lower Rio Grande Valley regions, and Tyler Payne, the GLO Project Manager for Central and East regions. Next slide. Thank you. So I did briefly mention a few of the members of the AECOM team, myself as the project manager and my outreach lead, Stephen Tolbert. My deputy project manager is Dan Zell, also with AECOM. Beyond that, we have a wealth of delivery partners. They are federal and state agencies and organizations. We'll be pulling from their strengths, expertise, and capabilities to enhance and expedite our efforts. This slide shows an overview of some of the key partnerships, including Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, Corps of Engineers, and the Water Development Board. The AECOM team for the West region includes technical and community engagement professionals who are experts in outreach, data collection, modeling, and analysis. We're really excited to be working with the GLO and the Water Development Board with all of these planning efforts. Next slide. So our flood study includes 5 major components that are shown here. They include stakeholder engagement, data collection, risk analysis, alternatives analysis, and funding and technical assistance. All of these components within the study must be completed by June 2024. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on the next slide. Go ahead. So here's our study timeline. As you can see from the timeline, execution of the study begins now, but the planning actually started last fall. Stakeholder engagement will span the length of the study, and our outreach team has been working closely with local officials to assess their specific needs and gaps in capabilities. We're also collecting crucial flood risk data, providing results on baseline modeling and mapping, prioritized to areas which need it, identifying targeted flood risk reduction projects, and making recommendations on viable grant fund options. As I mentioned before, accurate data collection is critical for determining flood risk and identifying appropriate mitigation projects. Our team is in the early stages of data collection and gap analysis, and will continue to provide outreach with local officials and staff to collect the most current and accurate data available. Then we'll before we finalize the study, we're going to be transforming that data and into a Texas Disaster Information System defined format so that it's accessible and available for future planning efforts. And I'll talk a little bit more about TDIS on a following slide. The risk analysis component of the study includes riverine and assessing riverine and coastal flood hazards. They're going to be defined for targeted areas of increased risk given a number of factors like flood loss history, population, future development, and other factors. This will allow communities to better understand the extent, severity, frequency of the flooding in their areas and know how to reduce those risks. We'll also be completing consequence analysis, which is going to estimate the damage caused by the associated flood risk. Once the level of the flood risk for community is determined, then we'll initiate an alternatives analysis to evaluate and identify appropriate options to reduce the risk. By winter 2021, we'll have a detailed plan to determine and evaluate several flood risk reduction alternatives. And by fall of 2022, project identification and prioritization will begin. Funding and technical assistance is the last component. As I mentioned earlier, our team will work with communities to match projects with funding sources. That's our ultimate goal. The bulk of this phase will not begin until the fall of 2023, but we're working now to identify up to 6 actionable flood risk reduction projects, which will be evaluated along with providing recommendations to obtain funding. Local officials will also be provided a screening tool to quickly identify appropriate funding sources. And between fall 2023 and spring 2024, we'll provide ongoing technical assistance to help local officials apply for the funding options, the funding streams that we identified. Next slide. So this diagram reflects our dedication to partnering with the regional flood planning groups to help contribute to the strong foundation that we recognize the regional flood planning groups will need to develop successful plans. While the regional flood planning group efforts for this first planning cycle may only be able to leverage early stakeholder engagement and data collection from our study, we hope to support in future plan updates and consider incorporating resulting information from our study to enhance those long-term planning efforts. Through our ongoing coordination and goal sharing available information, we want to support the identification, and planning of flood management strategies, flood management evaluations, and flood mitigation projects. As we engage stakeholders through the study, data collection will be our primary focus and the basis for identifying flood risks, strategies, and future projects. We're also developing and can provide a funding matrix to be included in the regional flood plans as a screening tool. Although both entities are considering coastal and riverine flooding, the focus for the GLO's combined river basin study is for the Hurricane Harvey disaster impacted counties rather than all of Texas. Additionally, the study will support an alternatives analysis and project cost estimates for targeted high-risk areas rather than a planning level effort for the entire state. So most notably, our goals and duration for between the two efforts are a little bit different. Our GLO study is a one-time effort aimed at evaluating existing flood risks to inform the development of cost-effective mitigation projects for areas identified at highest risk, and then subsequently providing technical assistance to obtain grant funds, where it's our understanding that the regional flood planning group's efforts may be leveraging some of the same available data, but will be used to develop comprehensive regional plans, which consider a much broader range of area, conditions, and strategies to set specific goals to improve flood resiliency across the state. Regardless, we share a common goal of working towards flood resiliency, and we look forward to collaborating with this and all the other regional flood planning groups. Next slide. So here again is our project timeline, but also we're showing the regional flood planning group's key milestones. Our goal is to support these milestones through the study. With the first planning cycle, we hope to share stakeholder engagement resources developed or compiled, and then provide any data that was collected through our process up to this point. And then for future planning cycles, we plan on providing that same information, but then also being able to share baseline flood risk modeling and mapping where it was developed, and then provide information on identified mitigation projects developed in support of the alternatives analysis. We'll share grant application and technical assistance information as well. Again, this is for the future planning cycles, not this first one. Next slide, please. All right. So as I previously mentioned, our outreach team is working with the communities to identify appropriate funding sources for identified projects to apply for those grants. The matrix shown here includes examples of some of the funding sources available, which include FEMA, USDA, Water Development Board, HUD, and funding from local governments. The funding matrix matches funding to flood management strategies, flood management evaluations, and flood mitigation projects. Next slide. So I briefly mentioned TDIS earlier. The Texas Disaster Information System, the data that we collect and we produce through the GLO study will inform the newly created Texas Disaster Information System. In coordination with TDIS, we'll ensure that the data and the models are in a format that can be easily shared. And the data will be housed by TDIS. This data will provide critical flood risk information within an accessible online dashboard. And that dashboard will be housed by Texas A&M University Systems, and will provide communities with the most current and accurate information available so that they can better assess local disaster risks, impacts, and mitigation strategies. Next slide, please. All right, next steps. As I wrap up the presentation, just wanted to touch on next steps in our study. Over the next several months, we'll be providing targeted outreach to elected officials and staff to introduce specific goals and objectives of the study. Starting late last month, we also distributed an initial survey to elected and non-elected officials, and we've initiated several virtual study kickoff information sessions, and that's what I was promoting at your last meeting. For the remainder of the year, the risk analysis team will be coordinating with the Corps of Engineers to conduct coastal and riverine pilot studies that will help define consistent approaches for the risk analysis. And as we move through these next steps and future efforts, we look forward to working with this regional flood planning group and reporting out our project progress and sharing resources to benefit the regional flood planning process. Throughout the study, feel free to contact us at the email address listed there. If you have any questions or would like to have separate meetings with the project team, including the GLO, it's just a matter of coordination. We'd be happy to set aside time to do that. We'll also be reaching out in a number of ways, whether it be phone calls or, who knows, in-person meetings in the future. Definitely looking forward to meeting all the local stakeholders and finding out your needs and how we can make all of the communities more resilient in the future. Next slide. And that's really the end of the presentation. I just wanted to thank you again for having the opportunity to talk about the combined river basin flood study, and we look forward to continued communication through the process. Do we have any questions?
Elizabeth, this is Suzanne Scott. I just have a quick question.
Sure.
As you saw, I guess, if you stayed on the the meeting last time, Aaron Cavazos with the San Antonio River Authority made a presentation on all of the various modeling efforts going on here in the San Antonio River Basin. I'm just wondering if you will be able to utilize that data. I mean, it's a significant investment that's been made by the River Authority in new maps, new models, you know, predictive flood modeling. I mean, there's a whole host of things, new flood maps, risk map products that have been put together, et cetera. I'm just curious if you're going to gather all that data so that that investment by the, you know, the River Authority would be utilized for your effort.
Most certainly, and I did take notes. I did, it looked like some of the studies were not yet complete. Further in the south, and that's kind of where the limits of the GLO's West region extents are. But reaching out to Aaron is definitely on my to-do list. We will be leveraging as much study data that is out there, whether it be from Water Development Board, SARA, FEMA. We're pulling it all and we'll be leveraging it. We're starting from the base level engineering that either the Water Development Board or FEMA has been doing across the state. That's our starting point, but we're also going to be pulling the more detailed studies that we know exist. So it's just a matter of reaching out once we know it's out there. And I certainly will be reaching out to San Antonio River Authority to get that information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Perfect.
Elizabeth, this is Debbie Reed, and I had a question, not knowing your process or your priorities, but you mentioned strategies. Will nature-based solutions be a part of those strategies?
I definitely think that it could be. We haven't started to formulate those just yet, but we definitely see the benefit. And you know, in watching presentations from the ASFPM National Conference, there certainly is a focus for that. So I could see us doing that. Right now, we're in the process of defining what is risk so that we can identify areas of high risk that are going to get those elevated studies. And then the next step would be project prioritization. And we are looking at the Water Development Board's process for project prioritization, which is going to include a number of factors, including the social vulnerability and low to moderate income, you know, talking about equity. We're going to make sure that we're factoring that in as well. But so nature-based solutions is definitely an option up for consideration for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Elizabeth, thank you for the presentation. Certainly some good information. I'm curious, it sounds like Kendall has a copy of the presentation. Would it be okay with you to share with all our committee members so that they can read over the presentation?
Most certainly.
Thank you. We'll certainly be in touch with you because I think we certainly would like to hear any kind of updates as as you guys start developing and moving forward.
Perfect. Yes, sounds good. And we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for making time this morning to share with us this presentation. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda. Our next item, as general, we give a time to our liaisons for the different regions, our neighboring regions. They obviously they're having their meetings, and several of our staff members, several of our board members here attend their meetings. So let me turn the time over to liaison. I'm not sure. I think Kara is not here today. She told me that she was going to be out. But Suzanne, do you have an update for your region?
Yes, sir, Neffy, I do. Region 11 met recently. They had a presentation by Freeze Nichols, which was the firm that was selected as their technical consultants, and they kind of started talking a little bit about their process to begin their work as the technical consultant. The flood planning group had a long discussion about public meetings and how they wanted to handle public meetings, not only for the sort of these initial meetings that we had today, but also throughout the process. So they talked about having public meetings throughout their basin, the region 11. And so a combination, they're talking about a combination of virtual and in-person meetings, and are really trying to figure out how they can get as much public participation as possible in their planning effort. So again, that was something that came from their public consultant, their stakeholder input consultant on the Freeze Nichols team. So possibly as HDR half team gets together, the public participation consultant, we may want to have a conversation about those type, what's our strategy for getting as much participation as possible. The other thing is they did have a nature-based solutions, green infrastructure presentation by the Texas Living Waters group. It was in combination with a couple of other environmental groups that participated in putting that presentation together. I think that Debbie Reed may be taking a leadership role in trying to get that presentation to our group as well. And then lots of discussion. I think they're going to try to have their August meeting in person. So they're trying to move to in-person meetings and moving away from virtual meetings. So those were my notes, Neffy. Thank you.
I'm not sure where Chair Garza went off to, but at this time, can we have an update from Region 13?
Yes, this is Dave Malk. They met recently and they had an overview basically showing the teams from their consultant HDR and going over their different roles. They also appointed a liaison to us, Patrick McGinney. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And also they filled a vacancy in flood districts. It was actually filled by a colleague of mine, Larry Thomas. He works with me out here at the Bandera County River Authority, and he was with USGS for 36 years. So he's going to be a good addition to that basin. The next time they're going to meet is on the 24th. So that's basically everything I got.
Thank you, Mr. Mock. Let's see. Chair Garza, I think you just came back.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I lost connection online.
We were able to receive an update on Region 13 from Mr. Mock and are prepared to move on to the next agenda item.
All right. Thank you. Technology, boy, I tell you, I can't wait until we have in-person meetings. Hopefully with the relaxing of some of these rules, hopefully we can get to in-person meetings soon. So let's go on to the next item if all the updates have been given. Again, let me remind all those that are on the call, here's an opportunity once again. And always during our meetings, we have 2 opportunities to do public comments. So please feel free to share your thoughts, your comments. We look forward to hearing them. So we will limit you though to 3 minutes. So if there's anybody that would like to share a comment, Kendall, have we seen any, have you had any requests?
No, sir, no requests for public comment.
Okay, hearing none, then let's move on to the next item. Item 12. So committee members, the next meeting on the agenda right now scheduled for June 15th at 9 a.m. Is there any concerns, any questions about this date? I think some of the agenda items that we've requested is a presentation from our sponsor, the River Authority, on efforts in the lower communities. And we will be sending out a draft agenda for any other items available there.
Neffy, it's Debbie Reed, and I just wanted to say that I did have a confirmation that June the 15th will work for the group wanting to do the nature-based solutions.
Oh, good, good, yes. That'll be a second presentation. That'll be an excellent presentation. Looking forward to that. So, any other discussions on the next agenda? If not, I think I'll open up the floor to the next agenda item. Sorry. If there isn't any other questions or comments, I think I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Hey, Neffy, this is Dave. Right before we adjourn, and you had mentioned it, but I think it's worth having the discussion about the viability in the future of having in-person meetings. My only concern with this group is because of the large geographic distribution of people. It may limit participation if we try to go in person, but perhaps some hybrid of in person and virtual. I don't know. It's just something worth discussing. Oftentimes I feel like the meetings are more productive when we're able to bounce ideas off each other face to face.
Yeah, Dave, and I agree with you. I think a hybrid would probably work given our particular circumstances, and also understanding a facility that can hold this board. I think we'll have some preliminary discussions with the board about when we can start doing that, and maybe we begin with the executive team. And then work our way through some of those items. So, but that's a good valid point.
This is Dave Malk. I agree with that. But one thing we're going to have to watch is the legislature. My understanding is a lot of the bills to allow districts and planning groups to continue to meet via Zoom are not doing real well. And there's a possibility we may not have a choice in the matter.
Understood. Any other comments or concerns or questions? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Dave Wegman, move to adjourn.
Thank you, Dave.
John Beeson seconds that.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
A motion and a second. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you guys so much. Great meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neffy.
Thank you, Neffy. Have a great